Welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast. This is Bruce Hutchin, host and executive producer. Each week you will hear tips, techniques, strategies, and personal stories from some of the best and funniest whitetail hunters in North America. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you do, tell a friend on social media. If not, tell me and I'll make it better. Thanks for listening, folks. Hey, folks, we got a new sponsor. It's called Buckwild Coffee. What's so special about Buckwild Coffee? Well, a gazillion people go to Starbucks every day and drink coffee. Well, why shouldn't Buckwild Coffee offer you light, medium, or dark roast with free shipping? All you have to do is go to whitetailrendezvous.com, go to shop, and order your coffee, and I'll ship it out for free. Hey, thanks so much for visiting Buckwild Coffee. The best brew in the West, the best brew around the campfire, the best brew in the hunting shack, the best brew anywhere. Buckwild Coffee. Get yours today. Coming up, we're heading out to Pennsylvania. We're going to meet up with Clint Campbell. A lot of you guys know Clint Campbell. He's got a podcast called The Truth from the Stand. And he also has an associated blog along with his podcast. What's Clint sharing with you? He's sharing with you what it means to be a hunter. He's sharing with you what it means to just go out there and hunt. Forget about all the possible accolades. Forget about everything that you think you knew about hunting. And all of a sudden you figure out it just didn't work because you read it in a magazine or whatever. Well, Truth from the Stand is exactly that. He'll tell you exactly what works for him. And during the show, you're going to find out how he put the smackdown on a 125 class buck in Ohio, and he was never on the ground before, and he did it in 3 sets. So a man that can do that is a man that's worthwhile to listen to. So I welcome Clint Campbell from the Truth from the Tree Stand podcast. Right, man, you just schooled me, man.
Yeah, it's one of those things, man. When you're out there and you're hunting, we oftentimes start to think that we start to figure some things out. You know what I mean? And then you have those moments where you kind of get as you just said, you kind of get schooled and get taught that we're on their turf whenever we're in the timber. That's their home, and that's where they are superior to us in just about every way, shape, and form. And it's humbling whenever they take the time to prove that to us on a continuous basis.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we got 15 minutes of good chatter here, and this is good stuff, and it's a great intro to Clint Campbell, and he's the host of Truth from the Stand. He's got a podcast, and he's done a lot of things, and we're going to talk about his musical talents in his 20s, and now what the heck he's doing over there in Pennsylvania and Ohio chasing whitetails. So, Clint, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on. And I've been following you for a while, and I know you had my buddy, my co-host on the podcast, Johnny Utah Mulligan, on a little while ago. And looking forward to chatting with you. And appreciate you having me on and presenting me to your listeners.
Yeah, and it's the podcast world. It's very interesting. It's growing faster than I could have imagined, because a lot of guys and gals are going into it. Now, just share with us just a couple minutes. Truth from the Stand, why you started it, and what do you want to do with it?
Yeah, so Truth from the Stand was one of those things where the short version, or the long/short version is I'd moved back to Pennsylvania from Florida, and I think we'll get into the musical piece, but I was there playing music for a bunch of years and moved back. And while I was in Orlando, I didn't have a whole lot of opportunity to hunt while I was there. I took one trip to Alaska, and when I got back here, I just kind of dove in head over heels back into hunting. I grew up hunting since I was just a kid. I mean, some of my earliest memories are my dad bringing game home, whether it was turkey, pheasant, or whatever the case was. And got back here and started getting back into hunting, and kind of jumped right into it, with both feet. And it was one of those things where I didn't start bow hunting until I got into my 30s. And I'm just one of those types of people that whenever I get into something, that's like, I just kind of go all in. I'm an all or nothing kind of guy. And I started reading some books and some magazines and stuff like that, and kind of learning some stuff on my own. And I had a good mentor who's a friend of my father-in-law's, who kind of showed me the way and kind of got me started. And I started following actually I started following Mark Kenyon and Wired to Hunt, and I thought it was a really interesting, perspective of kind of sharing, your missteps and stuff like that along the way. And I thought sometimes some of the conversation that I was hearing, or some of the articles and stuff that I was reading, were geared for people who might have a little bit more experience than others. And so I looked at it where I was like, I'm sure there's a lot of questions that I have that other people have that are maybe afraid to ask somebody. And I've always been one of those guys where, if you don't ask, you'll never know. And I have a really high tolerance for failure, I guess is what you would say. So, I have no problem just asking questions and trying to uncover the answers. And so I thought, if I have certain types of questions, I'm sure there are other people out there that have it too. I was like, and so why don't I create a platform where people can feel comfortable, joining in and hearing people talk about deer hunting, and I'll ask questions that I have, to help me get better as a hunter. And hopefully at the same time, it's helping people out there that are listening kind of accomplish their goals as well. And then secondarily, man, I just like to talk about deer hunting. So it was kind of selfishly, was really kind of the reason I started it. And I live in kind of a urban area too, near the Philadelphia area where I live now. I grew up in central PA, which is really rural. But where I live now, hunting is not a big thing. So there's not a ton of people around me that have hunting as an interest. So there wasn't like I had people that I could really connect with on a local level, to, about hunting. And recently I joined an archery club, and I've met a lot more people who are into hunting since then. But that was really kind of the beginning of it. It was just one of those things where I thought it would be a cool idea. My music background led me to be comfortable behind a microphone, so the podcast seemed like a natural thing to do. And as far as where it goes, who knows? It's like right now I'm just having fun, and Johnny Utah from Arrow Wild Company is now my co-host, and we're just having a good time bringing folks on talking about deer hunting. And we're hoping to try to bring some folks on who have different backgrounds, that are absolutely passionate about the outdoors, but maybe don't work in the outdoors, and maybe they have a different background, kind of like me, that comes from a music background, who's passionate about hunting. So we're looking to bring on people like that and just kind of spreading the good word and making sure we're a good ambassador for the outdoors.
Well said. And what I think podcasts do, all of us in the hunting, in the outdoor segment of it, is that we help with recruitment, because we need more kids to get involved in this. We need more kids to drop their technical devices and spend time in the outdoors. And I think this is one way, dads or uncles or brothers, man, you should check this out. This is really rad, or whatever, however you the kids talk today.
Right.
But to get them interested, and I like it because they're hearing stories, and you and I, in the intro about elk hunting, we were sharing some stories about this happened and that happened, and you said it well. Sitting around the campfire, it isn't all the successes. It's the arduous journey that you go on sometimes, where you're sort of kind of up against it, or maybe really up against it, and then it's over and you're behind, and it's behind you, and then you're healthy. I mean,
right.
And you're well. So
yeah.
It's just.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think, it's a good kind of a note to make as we're talking about podcasts, is just making sure that the quality content of the outdoor industry is making its way into the social spaces and the places where young people are consuming content. I think that's important. I think, to kind of add on to that is, with that, I think there's a heavy burden for those of us that put out the content to make sure that we're putting it out in the right light, and that we're not giving, ammo, if you will, to those who are anti-hunting, and making sure that we're framing things the right way and providing the correct lens to the experience. So we're portraying ourselves the way we want to be portrayed, the way that we want to be viewed. I think that's an important piece of it as well. And I hope that I'm doing my part. At least I'm trying to. But you're right. Hunter recruitment is a big thing. I was just talking to a buddy of mine from QDMA, and that was, for a long time, their focus has been let them go so they can grow, where their focus is now kind of shifting a little bit. They're still, all about that management aspect of it, but it's really about how do you fill the pipeline of the outdoor industry and hunting specifically with new and younger hunters. They've done a bunch of studies that kind of look at the average age of the whitetail hunter and how it's increased year over year, and at what point do people stop spending money in the outdoor industry? Once you hit a certain age, you kind of have all the gear you're ever going to want to have. And that's kind of eye-opening.
That's not true. That's not true, Clint. Because I'm older than you are. We'll leave it
Right,
at
right, right,
that.
right. N of one might be the outlier. No, but I mean, I think on the whole, that's one of the things they're concerned about, and I think the retailers of the outdoor industry are kind of taking notice of that too, and that there's work to be done. So, my hope is that everyone kind of recognizes that as an opportunity to re-engage the young hunters, and even engage those who are in their late 20s and early 30s who are driving a desk for a living. That they would love nothing more than to get out and hunt, and they just don't have any understanding of how to go out and do it. So take someone like that out and show them, how to shoot a bow or how to shoot a deer rifle or how to hunt a pheasant or whatever it is. But just get them outside and enjoying the outdoors. They'll thank you for it, and you'll feel good about it.
Yeah, one thing that warms my heart every time I go see the grandkids who get around, and especially this time of year, Gramps, when are we going to the range? When are we going to sight in rifles? When are we? I said,
Oh yeah.
Okay, tell me your football schedule, all your schedules, and then we'll get it worked out. But I just that's a joy. For me is that they have the desire to participate. They've heard plenty of stories and they know what I've done in the outdoor world, and they just said, well, tell me about this, tell me about that. How did that work out? What happened to those horses? but it's a story, and I guess that's why I bring the stuff up, because it's the story that engages the kids, and they go, wow, that's different than anything I'm living in, and those things really happen, and you can go do that, and you can travel, and you can climb those mountains, or raft those rivers. I mean, it's a venture, and some people will never get that. I understand that. But there's a lot of people, all they need to do is have somebody open that door, as you well said, and to that adventure, and who knows where they're going to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. There was a couple of neighbor kids I was talking to the one day at the bus stop. I had my daughter at the bus stop, and she actually goes to the range with me. She shoots a compound bow. She's 8 years old, and she keeps asking me when she can go to Montana and hunt with me, and when I'm going to take her to Ohio to hunt whitetail. And so she's all geeked up on it, and she wants to hopefully continue to do that. We'll see how that bears out as she gets older, but I just keep providing the opportunities to her, and we go on some turkey hunts together and squirrel hunts and stuff. But I was talking to the kids at the bus stop the one day because my daughter was asking me about something hunting related, and they said, "You hunt?" And I said, "Yeah." And they had some video game on their phone they were playing. It was like kind of like a hunting type of game or whatever. And they thought whenever I said that I hunted, that I meant that I hunted on a video game. And I said, no. I was like, I go into the woods and I hike in. I get in a tree stand. I use a bow. They're like, you shoot a bow? And I was like, yeah. I was like, you realize? And it like blew their mind that you could actually go do that. That was something that people go do that didn't just exist in a video game. So
yep,
work to be done.
A lot of work to be done. So listeners, talk to your neighbor kids. Do whatever you got to do. I had a Ace Luciano said it one. Just one more. Just one more. That was his thing. Yep. Every fall, he'd take out one more kid. He'd make a deal with himself every single year. He would go out and take one kid and introduce them to hunting. However, it didn't matter what the game was. It just, he would introduce them. And I think we all need to embrace that, because, we are under attack, if you will. And
it doesn't take much to make an impression either. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where, I'm friends with those kids' parents. We're bus stop parents together, and we'd have them over for dinner and stuff like that. And I knew that they weren't big hunters or fans of hunting, really, to be quite honest. We were talking one evening over dinner, and I just started talking about hunting, and I could tell it made them a little bit uneasy. But then they started asking me questions about it. And when I explained to them why I hunt and like what it means to me, and how much it is a part of the fabric of who I am, and then at the end of the dinner, and when they were getting ready to leave, it's like I offered them. I said, "Hey, I have a freezer full of venison." I was like, because they like to eat different types of things. They're very interested in different foods. I was like, if you're interested, I was like, you can have whatever you want from the freezer if you want to try venison if you've never had it before. And they said, yeah, that'd be great. So I shared it with them, and then a couple weeks later, they came, we met at the bus stop again, and they said that they had tried it and it was awesome. They were like, if you ever have any more that you want to share, like, we'd love to have it. And hunting became like okay then to them, because they saw that there was an output of it for me that I valued, that it was the food, that it was clean food for my family. It was the original organic, if you will. You know what I mean? So
It is.
Um, yeah. So they had an appreciation for it then at that point to where, look, I don't think that they're ever going to hunt necessarily. But the fact now that they have an appreciation that hunting is okay, and they understand why, most people hunt, or one of the reasons why you could or would. And so from that, I felt like it was, that was like a little, a little star beside my name.
Uh, well done. And that's what it takes. But you took the opportunity to just, hey, you want to try it? But first,
Yeah.
they were over at your house, and you built that relationship, and what's
Yeah.
wrong with that?
Yeah, exactly. It's, you can't be ashamed of who you are and where you come from, and just be honest with people about why you do things. And it's okay to have a disagreement. You know what I mean? It's, again, not everyone has to agree. And that's okay. I don't know that I'd want to live in a place where everyone agreed, quite frankly. But as long as you're able to have, a reasonable conversation with one another, and have an open mind, and be open to different perspectives, then I think, a lot can get done.
Let's talk about your hunting tradition. You mentioned that you basically grew up hunting, and in Pennsylvania. And so let's talk about how you were trained and taught. Was it your
Mm-hmm.
father, your grandfather?
Yeah. So, like a lot of folks, growing up in PA, it's, I've always said about Pennsylvania, it's one of those things that'll never be mistaken necessarily for a big buck state. The caliber of deer and the hunting pressure here is pretty hefty, in terms of the hunting pressure. The caliber of deer, you can get into some parts of the state where you can find really, really good deer, but on the whole, we're probably more in line with a Michigan and things of that nature with the hunting pressure and the type of deer that you can run across. But I grew up in a really rural area where hunting was just, what you did. I mean, there wasn't even like when you were a kid growing up, there was no question whether or not you were going to hunt. It was just a matter of, the time it took for you to be able to go get your permit and your license and stuff like that, so you get out in the timber. Because I partially grew up on a farm, so I was always out in the woods, kind of hunting with BB guns since I was, able to hold one basically. And my dad was the person who taught me how to hunt. It was one of those things where Dad was really, he was focused on it being, he drilled into me more the ethics of hunting and the safety of hunting, that came first and foremost. So that, I definitely have my dad to thank for, my ethical approach to hunting, and that, I don't take a shot unless I know that I can make it. I make sure I follow all my game laws and stuff like that, and try to stay brushed up on those, because that was just something he didn't tolerate. His kind of perspective was, if you can't do those small details right, then you don't have enough responsibility, or you're not, mature enough then to take the life of an animal, which I thank him for. But yeah, he taught me how to hunt. We did a lot of turkey hunting, pheasant hunting, rabbit hunting, deer hunting, of course. He wasn't a big archer. He did archery hunt a little bit. My dad shoots, he shot a recurve mostly growing up. Still shoots it from time to time. He switched over to a compound now. I've got him to do that just because he wants to do a couple hunts with me, I think, going west. And so I suggested he maybe try compound, because I don't think he spent enough time with his recurve to take that out. I think he would admit that too. But yeah, growing up, but yeah, he's the guy who taught me how to hunt. And I was fortunate growing up that we always had a chunk of land at least. My dad owned about 30 acres growing up, which is a small parcel, by most standards. And that's where I grew up doing a lot of hunting and cutting my teeth and tracking deer and trying to figure them out a little bit. And rifle season was obviously hard because we didn't have a lot of land, so we were basically trying to catch them running. It was the area we grew up in was more of a brown at down kind of area. My uncles were big hunters, and my dad enjoys traveling to hunt as well. He's been to Alaska, and he's hunted. He took a bull in Colorado, so he was out there a couple years ago. And that was really kind of how I cut my teeth growing up, was really just the normal small game stuff, and into whitetail hunting. It wasn't ever a question, like I said, whether or not I was going to do it. And it was just something that, it was almost like, that was the moment when you started to really kind of become a man in the area that I grew up in, is when you could start to do those types of things.
Thanks for that. And, it's a rich heritage that you do have. Mm-hmm. And I know you don't take that lightly.
Yeah. I mean, Pennsylvania definitely is a heritage hunting state. That's one thing. It's like I've always said, you wouldn't be at a loss for most places to find someone to talk hunting with in the state of Pennsylvania, especially as you get like in the central to the western part of the state. I mean, it's just, it's people are bananas for it. It's all my cousins hunt, all my uncles hunt. For the most part, when we go to a family reunion, it's funny because all the guys kind of corner off together over the 4th of July. All my cousins and stuff, we all get together at my aunt's place, and it's basically all the rest of the family on one side, and then it's basically me and my cousins hanging around the tailgate of one of my cousins' truck with a cooler, having a couple pops together, and basically talking about deer hunting for about 4 hours until everyone calls it an evening.
Well, that's the way it is.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're not going to apologize, that's for sure. So let's just spend a little bit of time on you headed to Florida, and you were in a band, or you were the band. What was going on there?
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy. It's like I said, I grew up in the really small town and stuff, and it was one of those things when I was a kid. There was not really anybody in my family that was musical, and for whatever reason, I just really kind of gravitated toward music for some reason, and I don't really know why. It's just kind of one of those things. I equated a lot to bow hunting. Really, it's one of those things that, like, once it's like in your blood or in your bones, it's like it's never going to come out. It's there for forever. And growing up, it's like I always kind of knew that I wanted to be a musician to some degree. And it just kind of worked out. I went to did the normal thing. I went through school and ended up going to college, and I guess I was a junior in college, and it was just one of those things where I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I was like, all I want to do is be a musician. I was like, I'm not sure why I'm here. I want to play rock and roll, so I decided, I was like, all right, I'm going to move to Orlando, because I went and checked it out, and it seemed to have a decent music scene. And I thought it was better to go there and try to be a big fish in a small pond first, rather than going to like New York or LA or Nashville or whatever. And headed to Orlando. I remember I called my now wife, my girlfriend at the time, and I basically just said, hey, I'm getting ready to move to Orlando to play music. You may or may not want to come, and that's okay, but I'm doing this. If so, then I'm leaving in 2 weeks. And she was like, let's go. So she actually graduated in like 2 weeks. And after her graduation day, we hopped in a U-Haul and drove to Orlando. And I started playing with a bunch of different people, just kind of trying to find my way, and, happened on to, into one band that had a record deal, and that didn't work out. I got fired from my first, like, I guess what you would call a professional gig, which wasn't a great start. I was young, and they thought they could take advantage of me, I guess, a little bit, but, so I stood my ground and got fired. And then from there, I was like, well, I'll just start my own band. So I started working in a recording studio that a buddy of mine owned, and started just writing demos, or doing all the demoing and stuff on my own, and started slowly but surely piecing a band together around it. And then, lo and behold, we had some good fortune and got a record deal and got to make a record. And I had the whole experience, got a record deal, got dropped, got picked up by another record company, and, and got to have a bunch of really cool experiences, played a bunch of great shows, made a bunch of great friends. And, and that was kind of what happened with music. And then I just got to a point to where it turned into a job, and I wasn't so sure that I wanted something that I cared that deeply about to become something I was going to end up disliking, because it was going to become my 9 to 5. So I ended up leaving the band right after we got back from LA recording at one point, and went back to school, finished my degree, and my wife and I decided to move back to Pennsylvania to be closer to family and raise our daughter in Pennsylvania. And then, and of course, fell in love with hunting, not that it ever left me, but I had to take a hiatus while I was doing music, because it was just, super time consuming between studio and playing live and stuff like that. And picked up the bow and started bow hunting. And it's just, there's a lot of parallels in my mind between bow hunting and music. One of them is just as a person who was a songwriter for a period of time, there's a lot of highs and lows with songwriting, where it's like, there's some days where songs just fall out of the sky and fall into your lap. There's other days or other times where you might have written a chorus a year ago, and now all of a sudden, a year later, you wrote a verse, and now it works with that chorus, and now you have a song. But that chorus has haunted you for a year, it seems like. And to me, hunting's kind of the same way, because there's certain hunts that, man, you just put all the work in the world in, and it just does not come together. And you might have to work on patterning a buck for 2-3 years or whatever, until you finally figure enough of the puzzle pieces out to really put a good hunt on him. And then there's days like I had in October, and I had in November last year in Ohio, where I did a bunch of summer scouting. I went to a new state I'd never been to, and I did a day scout on a big piece of public land. And I went and did 3 sets, and I killed a great Pope and Young public land deer in Ohio on 3 sets. You know what I mean? And it's just like,
Whitetail Rendezvous is pleased to announce a partnership with GoHunt.com. Who's GoHunt.com? Well, if you're a DIY hunter, you need the information at GoHunt.com/insider. Why? Because it provides 4,200 profiles, every unit, every species, and every season. Furthermore, they give in-depth analysis, interactive maps, unit access, and seasonal trends. Draws are very important, and they give you the most accurate information in the business. All this is available when you go to gohunt.com/insider. Make sure you use promo code WR when you join Insider. You'll get a $50 gift card for GoHunt.com Gear Shop. All in all, if you're hunting out west in 2018, GoHunt.com Insider is where you need to be to get all the research information. When you use promo code WR, Whitetail Rendezvous receives a small commission from GoHunt.com.
just kind of fell into place, you know. So you experience those dramatic highs and those dramatic lows, but there's always this like underlying passion and love for it that continues to bring you back, and that you just can't get enough of it.
I like how you said, being a munition and a hunter, it kind of falls together.
Yeah. I've always said that the same feeling that I would get, you know, I think the biggest show I ever played was this arena gig, and it was maybe 3,000 plus 3,000 to 5,000 like seat arena or whatever. I don't remember exactly how big the arena was, but it was a big place. So that was one of the biggest shows I've ever played. And the rush you get from that type of crowd, the only equivalent I've ever had to that has been sitting on stand and watching the buck that I'm about to release an arrow at approach my stand. Like, those are the only two things that I've ever had come close to that type of adrenaline. Now I've never went skydiving or anything like that, so that might be up there. But for me, I get the same feelings. It evokes the same emotions. Like, if I wrote a really powerful song, you know, there's been times where I wrote a song or wrote a chord progression or whatever, and a lyric that, you know, would, you know, potentially bring a tear to my own eye. Like, after writing it, I've had those same experiences on stand. It's like, I'm not ashamed to admit it, that it's like I've been moved in the timber the same way from a hunting experience, you know. And to me, that just kind of reinforces that I'm still connected to the outdoors and to nature in a real meaningful way, that it's able to move me like that, you know, emotionally. So, you know, for me, it's like when that's gone, then I think you should hang up the bow or hang up the guitar or hang up whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, because music does drive our emotions. I mean, people have made $1 gazillion by getting to people's emotion, and then they just embrace that song because it means something to them. And it's the same thing, listeners, when you're on that tree stand, Mr. Wonderful's coming up, and you just know, you know, an opportunity is going to present itself to take that deer, and it gets exciting. I mean, and if you don't get excited when that happens, just get out of the woods, go fly fishing or catch walleyes or shoot ducks. But that's the thing I've always said to my grandkids. They said, "How come you hunt so hard? How come you do it?" It's because I love it. And you know, since I was 10 years old, I've loved it. You know, and so you throw all it together and talking to you about, you know, how you created things, and I think creativity enters into the hunting realm. And let's talk about that Ohio 3-sit Pope and Young down. How did you do that? I mean, literally, okay, you're sitting in Pennsylvania, you got to go. Tell us how many miles, and tell us how you found the public land and how you decided where you put your stands. You know, take it apart and let's hear about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was one of those things where, you know, I think every hunter, you know, one of the things that I don't like hear people say is that, you know, I can't kill a deer like that, or there's not any deer like that around where I live. You know, it's like, that's fine. Go find them. You know, it's like, you have opportunity to hunt public land. It's one of the great things about, you know, this country, you know, is that we have public lands to go hunt. So access for you is there if you're willing to put in a little bit of work for it. So I was sitting in PA, and I just, you know, I had an expectation of the type of hunting I wanted to do and the type of deer that I wanted to hunt. And so I kind of narrowed it down to, well, how far am I willing to travel for that? And, for me being a PA, it was, I was looking at Ohio being the closest place to try to get me into the caliber of deer and the caliber of experience that I wanted to have. So, I knew Ohio was probably the place that I wanted to go. So I turned to going online and started just researching different counties that had good, good statistics as far as like good bucks taken and stuff like that. And, of course, like some of the counties that popped to the top of the list are places like Muskegon County and Coshocton and stuff like that. So I kind of penciled in like an area, that was like, okay, these are the counties I want to kind of go after. And I started looking at, well, what type of public land access do I have in these certain counties I was looking at. Kind of narrowed it down to, okay, it's going to be this county. And then I went from there, and I went and found some online maps of those pieces of public land that I had narrowed it down to, because I was wanting to see like how much camping is on them, how many horse trails are on them, are they using them for like BMX style bike riding or mountain biking or hiking or whatever. Because I wanted to go to an area that was going to have as little of that as possible, because I wanted to get away from people and I wanted to get away from disturbances. So I found that area that I wanted, that I thought would be a good place. It was a reasonable driving distance from my home. I then went to starting to look on like Google Earth and using things like Google Earth and Onyx Maps and stuff like that to start to really kind of dive into, looking at the topography of the land that I potentially wanted to hunt, trying to find places that I thought were going to be good places just by land features to check out. And I was looking at places that are maybe away from agricultural fields, places that look like it might be hard access. And that was I dropped some waypoints in those areas. And I think I might have had 7 whenever I went out there. And I told myself when I went out there, I was like, this will help me, of course, kind of streamline the amount of time I'm going to spend trying to hunt for a spot. So I'll go to these places. And then I had a criteria that was basically like, if I walk in and don't with relatively quickly find either the buck sign that I'm kind of looking for, or if I immediately start to see sign of other hunters, then I'm out of there. Like that's an abort mission kind of moment. And so I hopped in the truck. I drove whatever it was, 7 hours to Ohio in early September, and put boots on the ground for a day and hunted and hiked and scouted all those places. Of course, it's the hottest day of the year. Anytime I go to scout somewhere during the summer months, and worked up a pretty good sweat. Put a sun up to sundown. I think I pulled out of from my hometown. I drove part way back to my hometown and got there, I think, around 7:30, 7 o'clock in the morning in Ohio. And I scouted until 8:30, whatever it was, before it got dark. To be in the woods, and I ended up finding a couple of spots that piqued my interest. One spot was really interesting. It was on a creek bottom or a river bottom, and the opposite side of the river, of course, was just like a ridiculously steep ridge. And whenever I was scouting it, whenever you got to the bottom of that ridge, it was just thick and nasty, and it was a completely like straight up like vertical shot to get to toward the top of it. And so I started hiking it, and I found a couple of deer trails, but nothing too crazy. I mean, if anyone had hiked it and started walking up in there, I mean, you were basically having to machete your way through green briar and just nastiness. So I knew no one was really going to probably walk up through there, because it didn't present as an area that looked like it would have like a high deer density. But I put my time in. I got about 3/4 of the way up, and I found the sign that I was looking for, where I found some old rubs that were telling me that deer were using that area. I found some from the previous year, which is great. I went down on the back side of that ridge, and it was just like, I mean, things were just completely ripped up, from the previous year. So I kind of knew that that's probably where I wanted to be. That and the fact that I had to climb over a bunch of deadfall and machete my way through a bunch of green briar and just got all, cut up from the briars and stuff like that. I knew no one was going to make that hike to that spot, especially with a stand on their back. So I kind of penciled that in as my spot. I found a decent tree to climb, and marked the GPS spot. Went back in November. Literally walked in the first day, and my GPS died as I got part of the way into timber. And yeah, so I'm in there, and it was one of the only times I've ever been in the woods. Like I've hunted Alaska before and had some interesting experiences there, but it was probably the only time that I was in the timber in an unfamiliar place that my GPS died, and I actually had like a moment of like, all right, I'm not quite sure how I get out of here. Of course, there was no GPS, there was no cell service there, so it wasn't like I could call anybody. So I literally had a moment where I had to sit down for a second and be like, hey, idiot, this is how people die in the woods, when they just keep walking in circles. So stop and like figure out where you're going and like how you need to, try to make a game plan. So put a game plan. I ended up, getting my stuff together, and I made it back to where I thought I needed to be, and found a different tree that I actually preferred to climb at that point. Got everything set up, and I ended up being about 3/4 of the way up this ridge top after I did a bunch of meandering around the woods. And it was classic kind of Dan Enfalt, where I was 3/4 of the way up this ridge top on a leeward side of the ridge, where it's like the thermals were really going to work for me, especially in the morning. And I think the way I was positioned, I don't know what it was, but I was bulletproof in that stand day after day after day. I typically don't hunt the same stand over and over again, other than as long as I don't get seen going in, heard, or winded while I'm in the set, I feel pretty good about hunting it multiple days. And I picked that up from, Steve Bartillo is a big proponent of that approach. And sat in at the first evening, had some good deer movement, had a couple right under my stand, had no clue I was there. I could literally hear them chewing on greenbrier. Went back the second day, hunted an all-day set that day, had some decent deer movement. I think so. It was Thursday, Friday, yeah. And then I had a nice shooter that was dogging a doe come through, and he was interested in her. Of course, came in ripping up a bunch of trees, and putting on a show for me, grunting and carrying on. And she came within 30 yards of me through one of the only shooting windows I had, because it was so thick in there. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. This is like magic. I was like, he's going to follow her on a string, walk right in front of that window, and give me a broadside shot at 30 yards. Like, I can't believe it. Well, right before he got to that window, he ducked down into a bunch of thick stuff below me. So he got a little bit out of eyesight. I grunted at him. He ripped up a tree down there. I could see it shake, and he's carrying on. And then he just went silent, like dead silent. Like you would have swore he just laid down there. So I sat there for probably 10 or 15 minutes, and I just assumed he probably kept on that doe and kept going. And I was like, everything I had seen to that point was, responding to grunts at that point. So I thought, I was like, I'll throw out a grunt and see if I can't change his mind, see if maybe I can't convince him there's someone in his, on his turf that wants to pick a fight for his lady friend. I grunted, nothing. I turned to my left, and there he was standing. He already snuck back and J-hooked around me. And kind of like that elk did to you, snuck in on you. And I made the fatal mistake of just like I know better too. And I just didn't check my surroundings before I grunted to see if there was any deer around me. And he spotted me and took off. And that was it. Usually I wouldn't sit that same set again, but I just had so much stinking deer movement and rut activity there that I was like, I'm going to try it one more day. I was like, and then if I don't see deer, then I know that I blew up my spot, and that's it. And I was going to be in Ohio, I think, for about 10 days. So I had some days. Got in a set the next day, sat all day, had the normal. I had one buck that showed up every day about 8:30. He would show up. Saw him for a little bit, a couple does, and then it got real quiet and no activity midday, and it was, and I was just sitting there thinking to myself, I ate lunch and I was thinking, you know what? I was like, I usually never blind grunt. I was like, but every deer that I'd seen or buck that had grunted and I grunted back came running to my tree stand. And so everything I had seen had been really aggressive. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to throw out a blind grunt. It's about 1:30 and just see if something responds. I was like, and if the rest of the day is dead, then I'll move to a different spot tomorrow. Threw out a blind grunt. And as soon as I grunted, I heard something jump up on the other side of this drainage cut that was to my left. And he was bedded down to me really close, of course, because between the time I grunted and I released my arrow was about a total of 30 seconds. He came to about 23 yards, quartering pretty hard toward me. And I made a shot that I don't know that. I hit the range probably 2 to 3 days a week and shoot a good bit. I'm a decent shot, but I don't know if I had enough time to set that shot up, if I would have made the shot that I made because I slipped it right behind his front shoulder, and he ran all downhill, which was good. And because that was actually the way out, it was downhill, and piled up about 80 yards or whatever. And it was a 10-point. He scored 125 to 130 inches. I scored him while I was out there, and then I think I was so excited that I forgot to measure his brow times, which was a stupid mistake. But he's somewhere between 125 and 130 inches. So it was a great buck. I was super stoked to have him. I put my buddy that I was with in my same stand 2 days later, and he killed a great 8-point out of the same stand. So that's a hot spot.
Well, that's for darn sure. Now, interesting. You said you grunted. How loud was the grunt? Was it or louder than that?
No, it was really just like burr, 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 burr. Just like a little. a little grunt with a little tending grunt on the back of it, and that was about it. And that was all it took, man. And he was on it like no one's business, So, and that was pretty much the story for the whole time that I was in that tree stand. It was, I could throw out a grunt. I mean, there was a little 5-point that I hope he makes it 2 years, because in 2 years I'll go back and hunt him, because it looked like he had baseball bats on the top of his head. I mean, he was the weirdest looking rack that I had seen, but I mean, it looked like he had 2 little Louisville Sluggers from main beams on the top of his head. And then the rest of his rack wasn't impressive, but I mean, he was ridiculously tall, and the mass that he had for as young of a deer as he was ridiculous. But that little guy, man, I would grunt. He must have been bedded close by, because anytime I would hear a grunt, I'd respond back if nothing sounded like it was working to me. And he would come running on a sprint, slobbering, shaking his head, all puffed up, bristled out, looking like he was ready to tussle with somebody. But yeah, it's like I don't know, I think I sat 4 days and I saw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 bucks. And of those, 2 were definite, no doubt shooters. The one that I blew the chance on, and the one that I killed. And then there was another one that came in, that slipped in behind me, that I think he was a shooter, but there was a lot of stuff between he and I, so I couldn't tell for sure. But yeah, I was covered up in bucks that whole trip.
Wow. Now, the one you did call in, was he 50 yards from your stand, or 60 or 100? How far away do you think he was?
I couldn't see where he was from, because that drainage cut to my left was just full of briar, and you couldn't see across it. But the amount of time that it took for him to get from where he was bedded to me, I mean, he couldn't have been any further than maybe 30 yards. I would say from the spot that I shot him at. So from my tree stand, he probably would have been 50 yards. So from the spot that I released my arrow at, he was maybe 30 yards from it.
Yeah. And listeners, the reason I bring that up, so many times, if, Clint, obviously, he got into some place that probably nobody on planet Earth has hunted. At least anybody in Chicago has hunted. 2, he got set up in the right way. And I like how he said about the wind, and how it would be in his favor the whole time. And then, he did enough, grunting, and he kind of took inventory, and to sit in the stand all day is a lot of work, but he did it, and he made it work. And so you take those things away, and you go back to the beginning. I'm going to hunt Ohio. Where am I going to hunt? How am I going to hunt? Okay, I'm going to hunt here. And then with Google Earth and Onyx Maps, you can figure out, you can see places that you need to check out, which you did. And then you went Rambo style and clawing up a ridge line.
Yeah.
That's what it takes.
Yeah, it is, man. I mean, that's the thing. It's, if you're willing to put in the work, I mean, look, I could go back and hunt that spot this year and maybe not see any deer. I mean, that's the breaks, you know what I mean? But, more times than not, it's like I always say, some folks will say, that was a really lucky hunt. And I'm like, well, luck is opportunity meets preparation. I did a lot of preparation leading up to that hunt, with scouting maps and, putting boots on the ground. And, I spent hours looking at maps, maps, just whittling down the places that I wanted to go look at. It was time well spent, and I think if anybody does that, it's like, you'll be rewarded. And I think the key to it too is, I know a lot of folks, I'm guilty of this too. It's like, especially if I'm hunting, private ground at our family farms and stuff like that. It's, I got into a habit of, doing morning and evening hunts, where I would a lot of times come, get out of the woods midday. And I had never done that, excuse me, until I started bow hunting. There's just something I never did. I was always an all day hunter until I started bow hunting. And then, I know this trip kind of changed my outlook on it, to where I'm back in the all day, sits camp. Cause I just think that, especially that time of year, when you get to that late October, November time, it's like, you just don't know what's going to happen when. And how many times, I think back now, how many times have I got out of a stand and had a shooter walk by while I was eating a sandwich or eating soup? You know what I mean? So, I'm a advocate now of all day sets, especially once you get to the second half of October on.
Yeah, I kind of start all day sets Halloween, just because it's Halloween. And a lot of guys kill a lot of big bucks Halloween, and then you just run it. You run the course. Is it to the 7th? It's to the 10th. You just have to figure out, the prime, breeding season, and when they're chasing and seeking and all those type of things, and figure that out for you in your stand, and then have a couple of stands, and I rotate my stands. I typically
Mhm.
have 3 stands, if not 4, and then I'll just rotate them because
Yeah.
I don't like to sit the same stand more than 3 days in a row. But what does Steve say about that?
So what he's said in the past is that basically it's like if you're not getting blown up, a lot of people give up on a stand way too early. Where they'll have the mind where they can only hunt it once, and then that spot's kind of a dead spot for a week, 2 weeks, whatever you kind of subscribe to as far as your stand rotation philosophy is. But what he basically says is that if you're not being seen, your scent control's on point, and you're not being heard entering an exit, and you have really great access. That's like the key to it. Is like you have great in and out access. So you can hunt that stand multiple times. So it's like if you have on camera, for example, so you have a private parcel, and you have this great shooter that's coming by this bean field or a cornfield or a clover field or whatever it is. He's using this, little pinch point between his bedding and that field to get there. And you have him coming by there every evening at 6:30 or whatever, or 5 o'clock or 4:30, whatever it is, whatever time of year it is, with enough daylight left. And you hunt it one day, and say you get a sighting of him, but it's after dark. It's like he didn't see you. The does, if there are other deer with him, didn't see you. They didn't look like they winded you or weren't spooked at all. And you have great access out here, and you're not bumping deer to and from your stand. And there's no reason, if the wind conditions and the conditions are correct, that he should use that same pinch point. Then you should absolutely be back in that stand the next day if the weather factors and everything kind of line up for you, and the wind lines up for you. He definitely doesn't. I don't think anyone would recommend getting into a stand on a bad wind day if it's just absolutely not in your favor. But if you do have the same favorable conditions, you absolutely should make a second hunt at it, and a third if need be. Now there is a point of diminishing returns. I don't recall exactly what he said about that, the number of them, but I mean, I would throw 3 sets at it. I wouldn't have a necessary problem. I did that in Ohio. It was 3 sets, and I was still in good shape.
Yeah, you had a lot of different things going for you because, like I said, nobody's hunted that. Those deer have probably never seen anybody on that ridge, just with the description.
Yeah, it was the most relaxed deer that I think I had ever seen coming from Pennsylvania, where they literally will look up a tree and spot you, like even though you haven't made a sound. It seems like they are trained at birth to look up trees. So that was something that was definitely different. It was the most relaxed I'd ever seen deer before.
Yeah. Well done. And we're at the time we got to call it a show, Mr. Clint Campbell and Truth from the Stand podcast. But this has been amazing. I can't wait to see the photos from your journey out west and to hear some stories. So we'll have to connect in a few months after I get home and Christmas is gone. And next January, I'd love to hear the stories.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'd love to come back on and share those with you. And I'm sure I'll be posting some of those, whether they're on Instagram or Facebook or, on the site or whatever. I'm sure I'll be sharing some of those stories as we go along.
So on behalf of thousands of listeners across North America who listen to Whitetail Rendezvous podcast, Clint Campbell, it's been just a pleasure. And now it went really quick.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to doing it again, Bruce. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate your listeners taking the time to indulge me with listening to me talk about one of the things that I absolutely love, which is all things deer hunting and the novice that I am at elk hunting at this point, and hope to climb the ranks of that as well. We'll see.
Take care, my friend. We're heading down to Texas. We're going to connect with a good friend of mine from Columbus, Texas, Herman Brune. Now, Herman is a prolific writer for the Texas Fish and Game magazine. He's also the vice president of Texas Sportsman Association. He's been a guide and a hunter, did a lot of hunting up in Wyoming, and all around, true to earth cowboy of the highest order. Hey, folks, we got a new sponsor. It's called Buckwild Coffee. What's so special about Buckwild Coffee? Well, a gazillion people go to Starbucks every day and drink coffee. Well, why shouldn't Buckwild Coffee offer you light, medium, or dark roast with free shipping? All you have to do is go to whitetailrendezvous.com, go to shop, and order your coffee, and I'll ship it out for free. Hey, thanks so much for visiting Buckwild Coffee. The best brew in the West, the best brew around the campfire, the best brew in the hunting shack, the best brew anywhere. Buckwild Coffee. Get yours today. Mr. Herman Brune.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.